Welcome to the Industry Experts Panel at PortfolioWealthGlobal.com. My name is Michelle Holliday. Today, we are welcoming back to the show Mr. WAYNE Jett. WAYNE is a constitutional attorney with an extensive expertise in history, which makes him fascinating to listen to. He is the author of The Fruits of Graft, Great Depressions Then and Now, which is a timeless historical masterpiece which tells the tale of the manipulations behind the scenes during the orchestration of the Great Depression and the people who profited from it. Whenever we have WAYNE on this show, we always get great follow-up questions and requests to have him back. Just recently, with everything that's going on, we've had a lot of questions from Mr. Jett about the deep state and how this connects back historically to everything that's going on right now. WAYNE, welcome back to the show. How are you today?
I'm great. Delighted to be with you, Michelle. Thank you.
We are thrilled to have you here. Everyone is thrilled to have you here. And we're going to start off with the deep state because that's what we're getting the most questions about. What do you see as the most important thing that's going on in our country right now? And is all this indeed connected to what we call the deep state?
Well, yes, it certainly is connected to the deep state. What we have going on right now, I believe, as I've written recently on my website, an insurgency, foreign sponsored, but also domestically sponsored by the supporters of the globalist cabal, is what I call them. But they certainly are present in our country directly. They're on Wall Street. They own the big banks. They own much of our governmental representatives in terms of having them co-opted, sponsored in each of the two parties. They've controlled both of our parties for many years. They decided in 1880 they needed to control both parties, not just one, in order to make sure they always had the influence they needed at the presidential level and certainly below that as well. 1880 was an important time because it was the year that the book Progress and Poverty by Henry George came out. And in one paragraph, after explaining all of the wrong reasoning of why there are so many poor people, he had debunked all of those theories supposedly that had been put out by the globalist cabal. And he came down to one paragraph and he said, there is a powerful pecuniary force that writes laws and molds thoughts in every nation, and that it leads society in all the wrong directions, that it prevents ordinary people from having their say and using their judgment in solving the problems of the poor, and specifically, it follows a practice of buying up all of the land that is available for tilling by ordinary people and keeping it from them so that they can't produce enough wealth to support themselves and their family. That was a very important revelation, and I think is part of the reason that book sold more copies than any book on economics in history, still to this day. And it did that within a period of a short 20 years between 1880 and 1900. People all over the world were fascinated by that tremendously well-written book. I devote a complete chapter in my book, Chapter 4, to discussing that book and its significance. And as a result, we bring that into today's circumstances. And what we have today is what I think Henry George would have been delighted to have at that time, and did his best to actually bring it to the fore. That is to have a champion in the political system, at least in the United States, to call this globalist cabal, this powerful pecuniary force to task and to actually take it on and to wage war against it and to defeat it. He tried to do that in his book by simply reason, and he did a wonderful job at it. But the deep state was so whatever you call the deep state or the globalist cabal, was so powerful then. He was dead within that first 20 years. He died in 1998, supposedly of natural causes, but only a few days before.
Now, Wayne, did you mean to say 1998?
I'm sorry, 1898. Okay. I seem to slip a century at a time on occasion. But yes, in 1898 when he died, he was only 3 or 4 days away from what appeared to be a victory in his second try as to be elected as the mayor of New York City, a very powerful place at that time, and indicative of the fact that at that time he was regarded as one of the 2 or 3 most admired and respected men in the United States of America. And yet he was wiped completely, almost from the memory of Americans. I had never heard of him until I found his book when I was doing my research on my book, and was so impressed by it that I devoted an entire chapter to explaining it. That warning that he gave, that announcement of that powerful pecuniary force, is the warning that is finally being met by a president of the United States today, Donald Trump, in actually launching a counterassault with the forces of a nature, of a size and power that actually has the capability, in my honest opinion, of being able to defeat this powerful force, even though it has such a grip on our own government, has had it for years, even though it has a grip on the government of every other nation, just as it did in 1880. And so it's a powerful lesson to get your mind in a position of seeing that when we're talking, for example, about Russia, or talking, for example, about China, either of those nations also has a, whatever you want to call it, deep state or powerful pecuniary force that is influencing it. And as that 1901 plan that was published in English said, they would form a shadow government around every nation so that it weakens that government, weakens that nation, and finally has the national government fall within its own grasp and power, and therefore allow each nation to be destroyed, therefore giving complete control of the people of the world to that global cabal and one international dictatorship. And I'll just add one more point. We've talked about it before. That 1901 plan made it specifically clear that their objective in doing that, in large part, was to destroy every person in the middle class, to exterminate them. Specifically, they defined blacks, yellows, redskins, anyone, dirty-skinned whites, they call them, that is, laboring people. They didn't want anybody left inhabiting the earth except their servants. That is, the reliable, they called it, two-class system of the rulers and their servants. That was their stated objective. They went in much more detail, a graduated income tax. That was enacted in the United States, signed by a president who had promised his voters, Woodrow Wilson, had promised his voters that he would never allow a central bank, that he would now never allow a graduated income tax, and yet he did both of those things in 1913 before the year was over, his first year in office. He later expressed regret on that, and I think when he did was when he was hit with a mysterious illness that completely debilitated him, and his wife then became more or less the nominal president, taking care of things behind the scenes. He was not removed from office, but in fact he was completely debilitated. That is the kind of thing that we've seen the entire 20th century in the United States, and most certainly we're seeing it now, except with a great point of difference. We now have a fully capable president, one not only capable but willing to conduct a powerful counter-assault against these people worldwide. To understand what has been going on in his presidency, basically Donald Trump is having to deal with the deep states or the shadow governments of every other nation to depose of those deep states of shadow governments in China, in Russia, and so forth. President Putin has the same problem of having that shadow government afflicting his country, just as it did the entire 20th century, almost at least 70 years of it. When in 1913, when we put the Federal Reserve in as our privately owned central bank, my best estimation of what happened historically in Russia is that Russia's czar refused to do it. And as a result, their czar was kidnapped and assassinated. Their government was completely overtaken. They had a long civil war. Millions and millions of their people were killed in that civil war until the Reds defeated the Whites and took over. Russia at that time, yes, it had a head of government called the Tsar, but it was a very Christian nation. The Tsar, Nicholas II, and his entire family were practicing devout Christians who read and studied Bible verses every day, prayed every day. And yet they were kidnapped, they were held for a period of months and then shot to death, each one of them, including the debilitated son of the Tsar. So that's the circumstance of the nature of this deep state or shadow government that we're dealing with today, and one that I think is importantly in some respects on the run, but they are making their best efforts to overthrow the government of the United States. This insurgency that we've had lately has been financed, I think, in large part from outside the country, but certainly with very, very large money donations going into the organization that supposedly is the reason for these violent uprisings in the city. And amazingly, as has been pointed out by others, those hundreds of millions of dollars, if not billions, have gone straight into the coffers of the Democratic Party, into their political sponsorship of Biden or whomever they plan to put into the position of trying to depose President Trump. That is a situation, those are the facts on the ground. And I think it very much is a mirror of the kind of insurgency that was done and overthrowing the Tsar 103 years ago. They would like to do that same thing now. They will be even more imaginative and more vicious than they were in Russia if they get the chance. But so far, we're holding ground, and as a matter of fact, in some respects, I think have them on the run. Let me give you a chance for another question. I'm sorry to be so windy.
No,
but it's a big question, and it's a very important one.
Yes. This is, you made so many incredible points there. And I think the perspective is probably what's most important for people to understand. This is not President Trump up against the Democrats, per se. This is President Trump under duress and up against the global, international deep state. Because many people think of it as inside the United States, it's the Democrats against the Republicans, and they sort of don't realize that it's actually the world's governments going up against a man that not only is powerful enough to take them down, but has the intention to take them down, and they know it. And
to set them back in various important ways. I'll just try to be a brief example. In international relations, for example, dealing with North Korea. North Korea has been the outlaw of the world for, in my estimation, one reason. It has been a victim completely of the global cabal, controlling its government, requiring it and its people to be the ones who hate everybody and going to bomb everybody and so forth and so on. And in order to be able for President Trump to deal with the head of North Korea, it was necessary to first depose the shadow government, the deep state, to get on top of them, help the head of North Korea, get rid of his deep state that was undermining him and threatening him and his people, so that he would be free to actually become a reasonable person, which he immediately did as soon as the deep state was defeated there. But then, of course, as time goes on, they've crept their way back in. They've gotten in the way, as they are in China. They are certainly very powerful in China now, the deep state, and controlling through the Communist Party, they call it. But it is that global cabal that seeks to make sure that the United States does not win the war that it's waging to depose the globalist cabal completely. I would say, on the positive side of things, that there have been recent reports indicating that very important hubs of that global cabal have been deposed already. And I think I'll just leave it at that at this point. I can't prove it, but I give credit to those reports as being sincere and hopefully valid. That's my view about it. Or otherwise I wouldn't mention it.
You know, it's so incredible, the magnitude of what we are watching going on in the world. The majority of people have no clue that it's even happening. They're just dealing with what they consider to be COVID-19 and masks and not being able to go to work, and then riots from supposedly upset Black Americans. Basically, that's all they see. They don't realize the magnitude of what is happening right now, that our president is taking on the global deep state in every government, and he's winning. And
yes, and I think that in terms of the majority being in the dark, it's very understandable around the world that they are in that situation, because it's not because they're just ignorant or unaware or uninterested or disinterested. They are misled actively. We are in our country by our mainstream media, by our academics, our universities, even our elementary and high school education any longer is so debilitated by the influence. I'm sure not just myself, but I certainly have experienced directly tremendous difficulty in getting any kind of review for my book, even though there are a number of people such as yourself who have given it, I think, important recognition, because it is in black and white that there were specific, overwhelmingly visible and understandable events, actions that were taking place to impose the Great Depression on the United States of America, on all Americans, and on other countries of the world. And it was done by a revered president of the United States of America. In fact, two of them, both Hoover and FDR. But FDR was the one who really did the major things that made certain that that was a deep and very severe depression, starving to death millions of Americans. It was absolutely deplorable. And yet during those first 8 years, when the depression, so-called, came to an end under his careful administration, in those 8 years, he bought more than twice as much gold than the United States had acquired in all of its commercial history of well over 100 years prior to the time he came to office. And he did so out of money that he took out of the economy in taxes and in mortgage or bond borrowing, depriving the economy of that much money. That is why no one in the United States, Americans, would say nobody has any money. I remember my parents saying as much, and it was the clear story throughout the Great Depression. He created purposely a very severe deflation that, in effect, made good assets sell for 2 cents on the dollar, 2, 3, 4, 5 cents on the dollar. That's what was being done, whether it was oil, land, the best agricultural land, all going to the big corporations, throwing people off their family farms. That's not the only thing that he did. He set up the federal. He got control of the so-called Federal Reserve Board, and the first thing they did after he had the majority of appointees on the board is they, without reason, increased the reserve requirements of the banks by 50%. Now, that was at the time that the rush on the banks of 1933 was over. They had closed what supposedly were the weak banks. That rush on the banks of 33 was really caused by a major new income tax that had to be collected all on March 15th of 1933 that had been proposed and enacted under the Hoover administration, but didn't go into effect until the 33. All of it paid retroactively with no withholding. That had emptied banks of much of their money. But in 36, actually, the first action by FDR's Federal Reserve was to increase bank reserves by 50%, requiring even paying loans to be foreclosed and people thrown out on the street, thrown out from their homes, thrown out from their farms. This was so those ravenous owners of the cabal would be able to buy up all of these assets at such cheap prices. He was so greatly appreciated by the cabal that in 1938, a Russian member or operative of the global cabal testified in an interrogation by Stalin's secret police to the effect that Franklin Roosevelt was the most trusted operative ever in the history of the cabal, because he was so imaginative and so good at fooling people about his intentions that they just gave him his head about how to handle things in order to accomplish their objectives. That's related in chapter 17 of my book. And it's a terrible thing, but the United States and its government that has suffered so badly under the influence of the global cabal, that the United States has been used as a major weapon in their efforts to control the world. We have been used in many ways as the military power to accomplish the objectives of the global cabal. And all of that is what President Trump is trying to change, trying to stop, and doing a heck of a job at it. Although there are deeply embedded people of the deep state, the global cabal in our government, and he's still having the problems of draining the swamp. But I'm still encouraged. 2016 was a major time in the history of this country, and to the great benefit of the American people. And I hope we're going to be able to do it again in 2020. I'm certainly looking forward to that being the case.
A huge turning point. And something I want to mention to everybody, just to illustrate the fact that this is global that he's up against. And it is the global cabal sort of after the United States, because if they can take the United States down, if they can control the United States, turn us socialist, turn us communist, get our country under their control, then they can control the world, because we are the wall that stops it, and President Trump is what's standing between us and them, basically. But what I wanted everybody to notate is you brought up the Chinese Communist Party, which is basically deep state. I'm not talking about China. I'm not talking about people of China. I'm talking about the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party. And they're the ones that have enacted the Chinese social credit system, which is basically intense peer pressure to conform to what everybody thinks, otherwise be ostracized, which is the exact opposite of American freedom. Here in our country, we think and we speak freely our thoughts, and it's in our Constitution. We're protected to do so. However, you're noticing our society start to change, in which Americans upon Americans are pressuring other Americans to conform to what everyone is saying. That is strictly Chinese Communist Party. And also the wearing of the masks. You remember when a couple years ago you'd see people in masks and you knew what country it was. It was China, and supposedly it was about pollution. I don't know that now. I'm questioning that now, because all of a sudden the masks have come to our country. Also, it's very interesting. 5G is coming out of the Chinese Communist Party. The coronavirus came out of the Chinese Communist Party. And when I say out of the Chinese Communist Party, what I'm saying is they control the companies that control 5G. They control the laboratories that in Wuhan, where the virus was supposedly started. All of this can't be coincidental. I don't believe in coincidences, Wayne, but I wanted just to bring that up to everyone. It's very interesting. All of that is coming out of what we know.
No question about it. There's no coincidence whatsoever. And the so-called lure of the very cheap goods coming out of China, cheap because they use slave labor in order to produce these things. And our government just gobbling that up in past administrations, not in this one. This is what had to begin being undone, returning our supply chains to America, returning our sources of vital products to friendly countries, at least. But every country, every nation has been so deeply plagued by this global cabal. The crowned countries of Europe, the Western civilization, so forth, they have been deeply mired in this horrible, talk about superiority complex. I mean, read the little book by H.G. Wells. You can get it or find it at the University of Chicago Library. It's very hard to get their hands on. You get your hands on, but anticipations of the reactions of society to science and technology or something like that. It was a horribly long title that was intended to make it look like an intellectual work and keep ordinary people from paying attention to it. But the only hard copies are locked away in foundation vaults, as I learned when I was attempting to find it back in researching my book.
I want to stay with the president just for a moment, because it's very interesting that since the moment he was elected, we've had the fake Russia gate, and then we had the caravans of illegal immigrants and the Green New Deal with the orchestrated massive worldwide marches in the street. Then we had the impeachment trial. Now we've got the supposedly deadly outbreak of COVID-19, the Black Lives Matter riots, again, massive riots orchestrated worldwide. COVID-19 with parts of the entire country being locked down and a second wave coming in. And it's just very interesting that the American people are sort of watching this happen. CNN was actually on the air talking about the peaceful protests and defunding the police. This happened in Atlanta, Georgia, when the protesters showed up outside the station. They actually interrupted the programming about defunding the police to say, the police have arrived to protect us against the rioters. Number one, their special report was, the police have arrived at our station to protect us against the rioters. Once the police had everything under control,
Yes.
they went back to talking about the peaceful protesters and defunding the police. It was extraordinary.
It's just a sad situation that the media has been so completely captured. They have been for many years. Mockingbird media, in some respects, is, I'm sure most people understand, is a reference to the CIA Operation Mockingbird that was important, we'll say, in controlling media output on many subjects over a period of years after World War II. But I believe there's much more being done in terms of going at the horrible, inhuman kinds of operations that the deep state has been, that the global cabal has been inflicting on the world for many generations, hundreds of years, in terms of their satanic practices against other human beings. And it's never a good time to have to be able to talk about those kind of things, but they are so evil that they must be brought out in the open for people to see and to deal with, so that they can be expunged from the existence that is destroying the lives of so many human beings. I mean, you just can't put it any other way. It's not just that they're mean to people. There are, I think, many people are becoming aware of it now, but many are not. Many still just believe that if you can't believe the television, who can you believe? And the television, unfortunately, in America, you just can't believe in most cases. They simply have been taken over by the evil ones, and are being used to mislead people. I'm very thankful that at the time I went to school in a small town in Oklahoma during my youth, I had tremendous teachers, and they were allowed to teach. They were allowed to teach the basics that have been ripped out of the curriculum in my lifetime. They don't teach grammar any longer, which is a great affliction to people. They don't even teach cursive writing. You just use machines, or otherwise you don't communicate, I guess. But those are the kinds of intellectual capabilities that people have to have in order to really be able to think and communicate effectively, and to demand the free exercise of the rights that were recorded for us, won for us almost 300 years ago. But in any event, this is a very historic time. I'm hopeful that we're going to make it more historic in the election this year, and I'm hopeful, and I have high hopes that we're going to have important developments in this regard between now and the election. But just from the standpoint of someone who used to be a lawyer, I regard myself more as a classical economist now than as a lawyer. But back in the times when I was practicing law, I knew what the burden was of having to take hold of a problem and get a solution to it within a limited period of time. I had a straightforward constitutional law case, a very important one, under the taking clause of the Constitution, protecting the right guaranteed in the Constitution that private property can't be taken by the government without just compensation. And yet it took me 10 years, maybe 11, 75 to 86, so I guess that qualifies as 11, to get a decision by the Supreme Court that I lost 9-0, in which they refused to do that because they had already permitted private property to be taken for private use of others under the Due Process Clause. And they said, since we let it go that way, well, surely it must be all right. That is how, and that was by a so-called conservative majority Supreme Court headed by Rehnquist. And it was pathetic. We have a situation in this country in which the epitome, supposedly, of higher academics, Harvard, I have to say, in my humble opinion, is not an institution working in our best interests, and hasn't been for a long time. I say that partly because I wrote a piece recently about the Harvard Law Review, a law note that I take very seriously. They are supposedly the epitome of the top-rated law school in the country. Law notes are important things in which they try to state the law properly or influence the legal community in ways that provide leadership on policy. And they proposed an actual tactic and strategy to change the District of Columbia into a total of, I believe, 127 states with a simple act of a majority of the House and Senate. 127 states, newly created, with 2 new senators for each and 1 new representative for each, effectively giving the D.C. area of 10 square miles control of the entire Congress. And they say that is necessary and right in order to right the wrongs of having unequal representation among the states. Some states having only 2 senators when they have many more millions of people than other states who also get 2 senators. But they would do that not only in the House or in the Senate, but in the House. Therefore, as soon as they had that control, they would then undo the rest of the Bill of Rights. Now, that is not a joke. That is a battle plan that strikes right at the heart of the Constitution and our rights as Americans, rights that every other country in the world's citizens would love to have, and I'm sure are striving for that purpose. But when we have that kind of conduct by an academic institution that is revered by everyone in academia, they've spread their people, their graduates all over the university system as the honored members of any institution that can hire them. And then they show that kind of regard for what constitutional liberties are. It's outrageous.
Now, who proposed that? Explain one more time. I understand it's academics from Harvard proposing this.
Yes, a law review contains what's called law notes. They're taken very seriously. The university I graduated from in law school, Oklahoma, had a law review. The law notes are written by a combination of the top law students in the senior class, sometimes in the junior if they're really good, junior class as well. But they are written with the supervision and assistance of the professors on the faculty who are expert in that area that's addressed by the note. Their purpose is to assist the profession in the state or area in which the law school teaches and supplies its professionals, where its law review is read. And so therefore it's a very serious thing. It's not a comic book. It is not for humor. It's not for spoofing. So when the Harvard Law Review puts in something like that, and certainly acts as if it is, or speaks of itself as if it's the leadership of the United States a law profession, then you're talking about a serious matter, and one that ought to be looked at specifically and dealt with. And anything that is so subversive as that, they should not get a single cent of federal funds. And somehow they ought to be brought to the point of rectifying the kind of thinking that goes into their faculty and their teaching that would come out with an outrageous proposal such as deposing of our Bill of Rights.
That is just extraordinary, but it illustrates perfectly what's happening at the top of the Ivy League schools, which is very frightening. They've gotten themselves into the educational system in the highest levels.
And the same attitude is expressed throughout the press, whether it's the public, NPR, or the other private channels. All of it is as if we're simply to take whatever they say as the gospel. We should not use our judgment. And if we do use our judgment, we are to be demeaned as something that is racially hateful or something of the sort. So we've got to be vigilant and willing to take the slings and arrows that come with confronting this, and we have to defeat it.
And it's common sense. It is common sense. I mean, I'm going to bring something up, which is the immune system when we're talking about common sense, Wayne. And this COVID-19 with the social distancing. To me, to anyone that knows anything about the body, this is an attack on common sense. And most people do. I think that they're aware of this. The common immune system within the human being is use it or lose it. There's nobody healthier than, say, like the people at the airport who pat you down because they hit every germ possible in the world every day. Their immune system is constantly on guard. They're absolutely healthy. Someone's grandma who sits at home for 2 months by herself watching TV, the first germ the grandkids bring in, grandma's down sick for a month because her immune system is asleep. When you separate people, you shut down their immune systems. The immune system is made to be interactive. So that is common sense.
I've also read, though, something outside the area of common sense in some respects, is that both the mask and the separation have origins in terms of the reason they're put into this present situation. They have origins in research, psychological, psychiatric research by our so-called intelligence agencies, and that they are means of subjugating the population, whether it's our population or other national populations, that sort of thing. Obviously, it gets to the point of being almost absurd to have to mention it, but these kind of so-called epidemics seem to recur every time there's an important election. Every 4 years for sure, sometimes on the 2-year cycle. And they aid the kind of efforts to create false balloting results with mail-in ballots and things of that sort. I mean, these things are just so obvious. That's common sense. And so people have to continue insisting upon the use of common sense and the use of good judgment and the election of good leaders. I'm thinking that there are many Americans of every nationality and skin color and so forth who are very much of a common sense nature and are going to make the kind of judgments they need to make in order to make sure that they don't wind up being subjects of something like the Soviet Union was for 70 years. And now that the country is back fully Christian. And I'm telling you, in my estimation, You cannot regard a country or a government as communist when its people, over 80% of them, are devoutly Christian. It doesn't fit.
Right. Now, you just mentioned the mail-in voting, which is another common sense. Everybody knows that, I mean, and when I was in high school, there was a huge controversy because the prom queen was voted in by a bunch of fraudulent votes. Everybody knows how simple it is to do when you write in. Third graders can cheat on write-in ballots. It's just common sense because all you need to do is pay off the postal workers. I mean, there's so many ways to do that. I've got, 5 other ways to do it right off the top of my head. Don't want to, say them out loud, but come on. I mean,
it's just a matter of if you want to impose things like that and get away with it, you just have to persuade people, well, the government's in control anyway. They're going to do what they want. The powers that be will take care of this. There's nothing I can do about it. And so they let it slide. That's what Americans have to be vigilant about. They have to insist. They have to re-win their constitutional rights every day. They've got to make certain that we get our constitutional rights, or else they're not going to be granted by the people in government. They're not going to be. We've had the highest officials and occasions actually spoofing, laughing at constitutional rights, saying that old Constitution was written so long ago. I mean, we have a Supreme Court justice, at least we think that we're told that she's still surviving, although recently in the hospital, who has said that old Constitution written back in 1789, I would never use that as a pattern for a modern constitution for any other country. And of course, obviously not for this country as well. But there are rights still existing, and they're importantly existing in the minds of many Americans who are willing to fight for them, and many who have fought and died for them. And we're going to keep at it.
We have to use common sense, and we have to approach this as grown-ups. We can't be so childish as to, the Green New Deal, everybody march and print off $57 trillion. Otherwise, we're going to be dead in 10 years. And let's everybody, follow the autistic child, Greta Thunberg, because this is the way it's going to be.
Speaking of printing money, I think we're seeing the last days of the Federal Reserve. I believe that they may have already occurred, in fact, because there are certainly credible reports that the Fed has been taken into the Treasury Department, and the Fed chairman is now answering directly to the president. In those circumstances, I would expect the days, if they aren't already over, of the Fed are numbered, and that the paper currency that we've been forced to accept for our work, that's the way you enslave people. That's the way we've been enslaved for at least since 1933. That real value does not go into the pockets of Americans who work. They get only paper. And they were not allowed to buy gold, even with the paper, until 1971, 72, thereabouts, under the Nixon administration. We can buy it now for those who do. But it takes a redesigned system to have any kind of monetary system in which all of the earnings of workers goes into the control of a central authority, and they take care of it and supposedly are going to be faithful to their obligations to you when the time comes, but it never happens that way when a central authority has the control of all of the wealth earned by working people at whatever level. And so I'm hopeful that what I've been calling for a number of years in my writings, we must go to a gold-backed system. It can be gold and silver based as well. It's possible to do that sort of thing, but it is for one purpose. Two purposes. One is to get real value into the pockets, if necessary, of the people who earn the money. The other is to enable the money to do what it must do in order to have an efficient economy, and that is to have stable value. That's what gold does. It is the stable value whose value never changes, that when you meter your money by that, that's why gold is the monetary metal. It doesn't canker, it doesn't rust, it doesn't change values. It is always about the same value. And I would say, yes, it's possible that to bail out banks, you have to change the value of price of gold very high. But don't be too sure that you wish for that, because eventually the cost of everything else has to rise to that level. Gold only, an ounce of gold has a certain amount of value to it. And if it's $50,000, that means that you got to earn $50,000 to earn that little piece of gold. At which time, back in my dad's lifetime, that same piece of gold cost $20. And a person with a $20 gold piece in his pocket was pretty wealthy, but it wasn't so wealthy that, he was a millionaire. We'll put it that way. So let's look toward the time at which we can have a sound monetary system the world over. I think that's being worked on presently. So again, we have brighter days ahead if we can just pull this off. But we've got to stay vigilant and active in protecting our rights and doing what so many others have done on the battlefield. But we've got a battlefield going right now.
Perfect. For our final question, as far as the deep state goes, Wayne, what do you see in the future for the United States and for the rest of the world? How do you think that this will play out?
Well, I think we have either a very dark future, which I think is what was facing us in 2016. I've said previously that I was still living on the exhilaration of having dodged the bullet in 2016, but I think the much brighter prospect we face now is defeating the global cabal, the prospect of having an economy in the United States that grows the way it did in prosperity and the standing of the middle class as it grew during the 1800s and the 1900s, with people very well informed about monetary policy. And in fact, the elections of 1828 and 1832, I got the centuries right that time, with Andrew Jackson being elected to get rid of the central bank that was privately owned at that time, and he got it, surviving multiple assassination attempts with his own six-shooters that he carried with him in Washington, D.C. as president. We had a very prosperous century that grew the middle class. The rest of the world did as well. The cabal was still in existence at that time. They had not been defeated. We just had, we believed, had a victory and had a new world in which people could work in a location, an environment far away from the powers of the cabal at that time. And it took a while. It took until 1900 for them to really make their move to take control of the United States. And we suffered very badly during that 20th century in so many ways. But I'm hopeful that we're going to have a renewal of that opportunity for people around the world. And with technologies that are known to some now, known to the cabal, they've been kept from us, I think we have the possibilities of very, very great opportunities in the future. And I certainly pray for those for our children for future generations as well, and for every country. We've got, you talk about people supporting President Trump here. We've got people all over the world supporting him.
We sure do.
So I'm very hopeful they're going to get their chance to have an America Bill of Rights in their own countries, and they well deserve them.
Yes. Wayne, it is always amazing to have you on this show. Please tell everyone where they can go to find your amazing website, and also about your book and where to find it.
The best place to find both are at classicalcapital.com. It's a secure website. The homepage, the first thing you'll see as you scroll down is an announcement of my book and a buy button for it there. It's $25. It comes in hardback with sewn binding. It's called Smith sewn binding. That doesn't come apart when the glue melts. There's no glue, it's binding, the way books used to be made years ago, so that they last for generations. They're $25, and it's a substantial book. I couldn't be more proud of it. They're available presently. Get them while they last, because it's very hard to get books of this nature published by publishers. One of the provisions expressly stated in the 1901 plan was the cabal said we've got to control, and we will control the publishers so that ideas don't get out that we don't want people to know. And they've done it very well. It's very hard. For example, on Amazon, I don't sell there anymore, even though I created a page for the book there and originally sold there. Amazon insisted upon continuing to classify my book among grafting fruit trees and mental depression. Fruit trees and depression. And despite the repeated requests, they would never change that. They still have it to this day. And yet, since I'm not selling there, on my page, you find used copies or other new copies bought by wholesalers that sell for many times what $25 is. So come to my website, and I think that's the best place to buy it.
Great. Thank you so much for coming on this show today, Wayne.
Glad to be here, and thank you for having me. I'd love to be with you and your audience. Thank you, Michelle.
We will have you back soon. Mr. Wayne Jett, constitutional attorney, the founder at classicalcapital.com, the author of The Fruits of Graft, Great Depressions Then and Now, the Industry Experts Panel. I'm Michelle Holliday at PortfolioWealthGlobal.com.